The Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spagnola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we have interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mysteries of life. This episode is a complement to Ritual and Practice for the Urban Homestead, a retreat I'm co-leading with my husband, Ruben Anderson, this fall 2018 at Hollyhock Lifelong Learning Center on Cortez Island. For more information about that, go to the website hollyhock.ca. Today, I'm happy to welcome back to the podcast for the sixth time peak oil expert and polymath John Michael Greer. Today, we're celebrating the 10th anniversary of the publishing of his book, The Long Descent, A User's Guide to the End of the Industrial Age. This classic book follows our present industrial society down the well-worn path that's led other civilizations into decline. In the book, John explains how this path involves a much more complex and slower transformation than the sudden catastrophe scenarios imagined by doomsday preppers and Hollywood movies. To give you a sense of how he puts that path, charts that path throughout the book, I'd like to read you the 6 chapter titles. So Chapter 1 is called The End of the Industrial Age. Chapter 2, The Stories We Tell Ourselves. 3, Briefing for the Descent. 4, Facing the Deindustrial Age. 5, Tools for the Transition. And 6, The Spiritual Dimension. And there's quite a thorough appendix that's called How Civilizations Fall, A Theory of Catabolic Collapse. I connected with John online. He was at home in southern New England. Welcome back, John. So tell us again, what identities do you lead with?
This time, I think I lead with this. I am the guy who says the things you're not supposed to say. I'm the guy who says the things you're not supposed to talk about. I'm the guy who comes bearing bad news, and nobody wants to hear it, but it's time to wake up. The party is over.
I'm here. It'll be a party of 2. And some of the listeners I know are big fans and frequently comment that your episodes are their favorite.
I'm delighted to hear that.
Oh, good. And it'll probably be very mind expanding for some who maybe have cultivated deep inquiry into their spiritual lives, but haven't looked so much at what's happening on a planetary scale. So I'm here to celebrate The Long Descent and its 10th anniversary.
Good.
Congratulations on
well,
this.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a classic and it's standing the test of time. Now, for folks who haven't read it, in The Long Descent, you caution against, in quotes, immanentizing the eschaton.
Yeah, immanentizing the eschaton. In our popular Western religious traditions, we have this notion that of the end of the world. There's going to be this big kablooey, everything changes, and either we all die horribly, or the world is transformed, or the Space Brothers land, or Jesus shows up. It's all over. Kapow, Hollywood special effects, you name it. We all have this thing as part of our culture, and people are constantly looking for something to fill that slot. The eschaton, the end of things. They want to immanentize it. They want to make it part of their lived reality, and so people keep on getting incredibly frustrated because the universe doesn't provide those. I mean, are there disasters? Sure. Are there sudden improvements? Are there sudden worsenings? Do things change? Things are always changing, but there's never that orgasmic Hollywood kapots and we're all done.
Yeah. So this is like, I love what you say, that people are frustrated because it's so true. It's easy for people to, the zombie movies, the end of the world movie, this is how it ends shows. But you make the argument instead in The Long Descent for this long stair step of punctuated collapse where there are crisis incidents followed by the partial recovery, but things are never quite as good as they used to be. So it's kind of this crisis, calm, crisis with ever lowering levels of integration. So given the recent climate science of the past decade,
Hmm.
and given this worldwide heat wave starting in June that's still here in summer of 2018
Hmm.
in August, given the scale and ferocity of the fire sweeping the globe, does
Hmm.
this still feel like a gradual stair-step pattern to you or of
Oh,
collapse?
yes.
Really? So you wouldn't revise any?
This is what I'm talking about. This is one of those crises. Okay. If you happen to be caught in front of one of those fires and can't get out fast enough, your world has just ended.
Mhm.
Um, but and there are exactly this is exactly the kind of sharp ecological shift that will be followed. Watch this. Next summer is not going to be as bad as this summer. Now there will be another summer 3 or 4 or 5 years down the line that's even worse.
Mm.
But just as was it 2005, we had that 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 hideous run of devastating hurricanes here in the States,
Mm.
and it just bang, 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 bang. And everyone was saying, "Oh my God, next year is going to be worse." Next year wasn't worse,
Mm.
and that's actually the way things tend to happen. You get these sudden bursts of problems, and then things like basically the problems shift somewhere else.
So, in a future edition, though, of The Long Descent, would you talk a little bit more about death tolls or something? Because on paper, the book makes it sound pretty manageable, whereas this is like,
Well, it wasn't made to make it sound manageable, and in
mm,
fact, we'll be talking a little ways down the road about how social traps make it impossible to manage the decline.
mm,
The thing is, we're talking about death tolls. We're talking about a situation where over the next 1 to 300 years, we're going to see the world population decline to a small fraction of what it is today, and a lot
like
of
how
that,
much?
based on historical averages, about 5% of what it is now.
Wow. And
Yeah.
you're saying
Now
in a
that
couple hundred years.
in 1 to 300 years, that's the usual course of decline for a complex civilization like this one. Now, that doesn't mean that, again, watch the Hollywood thing. Everyone thinks, oh, good Lord, 95% of the people will die. You imagine everyone suddenly clutching their throat and toppling to the ground. In
Mhm.
fact, simple demographics will do most of that. You probably know people, I certainly do, who have young families or young couples who have decided they are not going to have children because they can't afford it, because the
Mhm.
world is in too much turmoil, because they're aware of the ecological burden that the 7 billion people are placing on this planet. Birth rates are dropping sharply all around the world, even in those places that were just overwhelmingly high population growth. Just a few decades ago, birth rates are dropping sharply. In
Mm.
much of the world, birth rates have already gone below replacement level. That's actually what's going to do much of the demographic contraction, just fewer
Hmm.
babies being born.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
so fewer babies being born, um, there will be more illnesses. There will be more health conditions that people have now that we can treat now. As technology becomes more and more pricey, becomes more and more unstable, a lot of those conditions will be less treatable, and so it goes. Um, Basically, if let's imagine 100 people, okay,
Mhm.
and imagine, and you think of the number, because every so often somebody in your circle dies. Okay, just in the normal way of things, people die. That's one of those things. Now, just imagine that every year from now on every single year, one more person dies than you're used to having die. Okay.
Mhm.
So, somebody dies of cancer or somebody dies in an accident or what have you. Just one more death per year. That's the kind of decline that actually will take a population from 7 billion to 5% of that in a couple of centuries.
Hmm.
So that's what we're looking at. That's not to say it's easy. Some of those people who die, you're going to miss.
Mhm.
That happens anyway, of course, but there will be more of them. And so this is the reality that we're already facing now, not, the great apocalyptic collapse, but every year something loses, something falls off, something has to be done without. Every year, the air quality has some. This year you've got the air quality problems and the horrible heat waves and things like that. Next year, maybe the sea level takes a jump upwards, and anybody who lives too close to the coast is suddenly getting water in their living room when they've got an onshore wind and an unusually high tide. And the year
Mhm.
after that, it's something different. That's
Mhm.
the reality of the long descent. You see, just this gradual process of decay that we're seeing it. We see this to a huge extent here in the United States because our infrastructure is just going to bits.
there's a story by a biologist who was studying the size of marlin caught in Florida over the last, since photographic evidence. And this showed up in my friend James's book, The Once and Future World. And it's about the shifting baselines of people's perception that they're not noticing the ecological collapse. And this woman, this biologist, found a family that had been going to Florida marlin fishing every year, multiple generations. So, for the past 50 years. And each year, it starts off with the fish in the 1930s, and they're as tall as a man. And over the years, you see the fish get smaller and smaller and smaller until the fish they're catching now are, the size of a 3-year-old. But guess what? The people are all smiling just as big today as they did in the 20s. They're all just as happy that they caught this fish. And I feel like
they caught this big fish. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That it seems to be what you're describing with the stair-step.
Yeah. And this is one of the ways that it's the thing to remember is that our species has been through cycles like this over and over and over again. Since civilization emerged, since we got to the societies complex enough to have stored food and cities and basic literacy and things like that, tribal societies are pretty stable. Mostly, there are exceptions. Once you get a civilization, you've got the boom and bust cycle. That's it. It seems to be hardwired into the structure of civilizations. They grow, they expand, they overshoot their ecological footprint. Down they go, down the long descent, 100 to 300 years until a dark age comes, and then somebody picks up the pieces. So we're used to this as a species. We're used to this. We've got all these various things. I mean, the human beings who could not handle collapse in the course of collapse obviously got filtered out of the gene pool. So we are all descended, except those few of us who come from the various peoples who weren't involved in civilizations before, and there are not that many of those. Most of us are descended from many, many, many generations of people who've been through exactly the same experience in the past, and so we're good at it. We've evolved to be good at it, and so exactly that kind of, the marlin's smaller, but look, it's such a neat marlin. In the same way, people are adjusting as the infrastructure begins to decay, as some of the goods and services we're used to aren't quite so available anymore, and they'll keep on adjusting all the way down the curve.
So that is sort of an oddly optimistic way of thinking about it, which I hadn't thought of before, but thank you.
Yeah, if I may add just one other thing. People tend to, they don't tend to give human beings credit for what they are. We are a generalist species. We're extremely adaptable. We're right up there with rats and cockroaches. We're very hard to kill. And we survive well. I mean, before we even invented machines more effective than a stone hand axe, we'd spread through every continent except for Antarctica. Okay, we're an amazingly successful species. We're really good at surviving. So I'm quite confident that human beings are going to, our species will pull through this. Our civilization won't. But that's another matter.
Yeah. So in your chapter, Briefing for the Descent, you outline the 4 facets of catabolic collapse. You call them the 4 horsemen. So those are 1, declining energy availability, 2, economic contraction, 3, collapsing public health, 4, political turmoil. Now, not knowing very much really about sociopolitics, my question is, do they always happen in that order? Because from this side of the fence here in Canada, looking at America, it looks like it's going in reverse. It looks like you have political turmoil, and then I can see other things coming down the pike.
Actually, no, all of them usually happen. They happen in whatever order they happen. It's not you go 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. It's all of these. Basically, it's like a horse race, okay? The gates come open and all 4 of the horsemen come galloping out, and it's anyone's guess which one's going to be in front. Right now, political turmoil is kind of leading the pack, but our public health is really bad down here. I don't know if you know, for example, that our rates of infant mortality are right on a par with those of Indonesia.
I did not know that.
Most people do not know that. The American public health types don't like talking about it, but it's very true. We have really bad public health down here. Economic contraction, we've had a lot of that. It's been papered over with a lot of, in basically the manufacture of IOUs. That is a vast amount of paper debt. But we've had a lot of economic contraction down here. And behind it all is the decline in the availability of cheap, concentrated fossil fuel reserves. So all of those horses are running down the curve right as we speak. And which one is at the head of the pack at any given time? Certainly President Trump is doing a very good job of jockeying that number 4, but we'll see about the others.
Well, and you spend a good deal at the beginning of The Long Descent explaining Hubbard's curve and why, sort of techno-utopian solutions, like they're just not going to work. So I kind of want to skip
not
all
going to
that
happen.
part.
Yeah.
It's like let's just get to what we have to do right now. So in the chapter Facing the Deindustrial Age, you then explain why the 3 most common responses to collapse basically are inadequate. I mean, and I love how you explain it. It's like, oh, so survivalism, that sucks. Like this other thing sucks. But here's a couple of quotes that I think just encapsulate the problem so well. You say, when the necessary changes could have been made easily, the danger was still so far away that it was all too easily ignored. Now that the danger is becoming obvious, the costs of change amount to requiring the population of the industrial world to surrender everything they think of as a normal lifestyle. And then you go on to talk about one of the social traps of all political systems is that, quote, they usually settle on choices with short-term benefits and long-term costs rather than choices with short-term costs and long-term benefits, even if the long-term issues are of far greater importance. I was like, oh God, when you put it so simply, it seems like this is a terrible problem because we keep repeating this. Do you think there's any scale of government that can resist that social trap?
One of the problems that we face here is that any government that's answerable to the people can't evade the social trap. I mean, if you can imagine, if any party in British Columbia, let's say, if any political party were to come out saying, "No, we're going to do without fossil fuels. We're going to ramp down to a third world lifestyle for everybody," how many people do you think they would? How many other candidates do you think would get elected?
Yeah, actually, and even just as you say that like if they have to answer to the people, it's never going to happen. They won't be able to
Exactly.
avoid the trap.
Exactly.
That feels so suffocating to just be like, oh
Yeah.
no.
No, the thing is, people get democracy, the democratic systems of government. I think it was Winston Churchill who said they are the worst system of government except for all the others.
Right.
Okay, democratic systems of government have huge problems. It's just that all the other ones have worse problems. And so that you see, that's just it. You could go for, I mean, if you lived in the in the Democratic People's Republic of British Columbia with some equivalent of Kim Jong Un in charge, okay, and he happened to decide that okay, we're going to make these changes. You'd make those changes. Or spend, or go off or get marched off into a prison camp somewhere, or simply shot. But there's a lot of other problems with that kind of government, so let's not go there. And furthermore, the likelihood that any such government would be accepted in a place like British Columbia is very, very low. So really, this is why a political solution isn't an option. Right. Because you've got that social trap in place where nobody's going to vote to give up a modern lifestyle. Well, a few people would, but not enough. Just a tiny minority of people. I mean, the thing I look at is that even the activists, even the people who are out there who are, protesting like pipelines, how many of them drive to those protests?
Yeah. Maybe you should tell the story of the monkey with this paw in a trap.
The monkey trap. Yeah, this is, I forget where it is, somewhere in Southeast Asia. They have this extremely ingenious way of trapping a monkey. They get like a coconut shell or something that has a hole in it, and it's anchored. It's tied by a rope to a stake in the ground. And into this coconut, the hollowed out coconut shell, they put a nut that's large enough that it can slip in through the hole. So the monkey comes around, it sees the thing, it sniffs it, it reaches in to grab the nut, and it finds that if it has its hand around the nut. It can't get its hand out. If it lets go of the nut, it could, but it doesn't want to let go of the nut. And so there it is, yanking desperately, trying, because he doesn't want to give up that nut. And so he sits there desperately yanking on the thing while the guy comes up and whacks him over the head.
God.
And that's the monkey trap.
And so we're all monkeys trapped. We won't let go of the net.
We have got our hands clenched around that fossil fuel nut, and we are clinging to it as it drags us down. And so, yeah, all of these people who are climbing into their SUVs to drive, to protest a pipeline that is shipping the fuel for those SUVs. By climbing into the SUV, you're voting for that pipeline. By leading a lifestyle that depends on the fossil fuels that pipeline provides, you're voting for that pipeline. And if you march around with a sign in your hands, that's aerobic exercise and nothing else. As long as you live, your lifestyle casts a bigger vote than anything else. And one of the reasons that the environmental movement has basically run aground at this point, nobody listens to them, is precisely that an enormous number of people have come to think of environmental activists as hypocrites, because they live a lifestyle that contradicts what they claim to be true. I mean, if you say global warming is going to destroy us all, and I'm going to go climb in an airplane, belching smoke into the atmosphere to go down to Mazatlan or someplace for my holidays, well, why should I do that?
Well, or even to some big conference for
exactly.
climate change conference and flying all over the world. What I love about the long descent, though, is that you really do say, like, look, this is a long, slow deindustrialization process. So, like, ye who has not yet sinned, cast the first stone. Like, all we can do is what we can do, but what we can do is a lot more than what we're doing. So, in terms of this, like shifting to deindustrialization, one of the challenges is, of course, we do all look to the government first. Like, if we would just do this or that doesn't work. But you do talk about, you encourage people to connect with community organizations. Now, one of the things, like maybe there's NGOs or social enterprises or other community networking organizations that might like position themselves to perhaps wrest some power or have some influence, or at least have enough of a community to provide some guidance and teaching or support or whatever. But as a person who has been involved in some of these organizations, and even in my own Quaker community, there's a lot of politicking that happens even at that scale, and I'm curious what your experience has been and what your thoughts have been. Like, is there a kind of scale at which everything just does become as ineffectual as politics, because we're once again victims of our own trap?
Well, okay, first of all, you're going to, anytime two human beings get within shouting range of each other, politics is going to happen. That's simply one of those things. The important thing is to find ways to make the politics as painless as possible. Okay, to manage the political interaction in a way that generally produces good results. And there are various ways to do that. The difficulty is that in a crisis situation of the kind that these sort of crisis after crisis, the sort of thing that we're facing now, it's very difficult to manage anything like that. But the crucial thing, and I'm cycling back just briefly to the thing we were just talking about, if you're not willing to change your own life, you're not going to be able to get anyone else to change.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the rock on which so much environmental activism breaks every time. You've got to lead by example. You've got to encourage mimesis. You've got to show people that, yeah, it's possible to have a perfectly good, happy lifestyle on a small fraction of the fossil fuels that we're used to using. Mm. And so that's where that's where real change is going to happen. And so once you have that, yeah, you can start networking. Different, people who, let's say, don't have cars. Mm-hmm. Could, every so often it's necessary to have a vehicle for something. You need a truck to haul some furniture or something like that. Okay, so you can end up with a group of people who have a truck in common. Mm-hmm. With a community group, well, a grange or a lodge or a church or what have you, that has a truck that can be used, when there's a need for a truck.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot of things. So there's like tool libraries and things like that. There are lots of things you can do once you've made the step to make changes in your own life. The possibilities really widen out to start from that grassroots level to organize in ways that can make life a lot easier for a lot of people. But
Mhm.
you've got to start with your own life, or
Yeah.
nothing actually gets changed.
Well, and you can start with one person. Actually, Ruben and I don't have a car and we have a co-op membership, but sometimes we want to go somewhere where we don't want to pay the mileage because it's like a long drive, let's say. And so it took us a while. It took me a while. Ruben is really great he'll ask anyone for a favor, whereas I find that just like breaking the social contract somehow. Like I have to know them well enough, I have to whatever. But now we've done this with two friends now where we just figure out an arrangement. Like we've just asked them like, hey, could we borrow your car since you work during the day? We want to drive, a couple hours to go to this river and take our kids swimming, that kind of thing. And we just found the person for whom that wasn't weird and she was okay with it. And now we do it a lot. We have another friend, she often needs to go traveling to see her family in a different province and she flies super early in the morning. And so I became the person who's like, yes, I will drive you to the airport at 5 a.m. And then I
Yeah.
use her car for a couple of weeks. But it started with like one person. I had to kind
Hmm.
of break through the habit
Hmm.
of the social
Hmm.
convention of that's just not what you do.
Hmm. Hmm. And
Mhm.
that's a really good example of how these things can be done. And as people interact to meet each other's needs in that kind of your friend needs a ride to the airport. Okay,
Mhm.
you can provide that. They have something they can do with you. This is what anthropologists call the gift economy. Okay,
Mhm.
where instead of taking it to a market, instead of doing a tit for tat exchange, you do something nice for somebody. There's some expectation they're going to do something nice for you. And it can all work out. It doesn't have to be measured out in dollars and cents. It doesn't have to be, negotiated as a tit for tat. Person A needs something. Person B can provide it. Person B needs something. Person C might be the one who provides it. And
Mhm.
this is the way most tribal societies actually run their economies. They
Mhm.
don't do the market economy shtick. It's a gift.
Mhm.
It's a gift economy. It's a customary economy. There are things that you just do, and so on and so forth. So as you're doing that, you're actually making an important adaptation toward the long descent, because that's the kind of economy we're going to have at the bottom of the descent.
So in the section where you discuss the problems of survivalism, that kind of
Hmm.
head for the hills,
Hmm.
doomsday prepper type thing, you mentioned that those whose value consists of things they can do and teach are generally left unharmed when rural anarchy runs amok. Like you talk about how people think, oh, I'm going to move to the country, but actually there's problems with that. But people who are useful and people who can teach, you know tend to be highly valued. And then later in the book you discuss more specifically the vocations that are more collapse friendly. And I'm sure our listeners, Ruben and I, have talked about this for like a decade now, always kind of pondering, um, like what would be your specific suggestions about choosing a viable profession in times of persistent precarity? And maybe there's some that are maybe not as highly valued now, but could be later. Like, what should we be
Hmm.
encouraging our children to look at?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, partly we don't know. Partly it's important to be nimble. It's important not to assume that we know how things are going to be shaping up. We know how things are going to work out. We do know that certain skills tend to be extremely highly valued in just about any context. For example, the example I always use is learn how to brew good beer.
Hmm.
Okay? If Attila the Hun comes to your door and you can hand him a cold one and say, "Here, have it, enjoy," you've got a friend. And
Hmm.
if your friend is the local warlord, and you can provide him with good beer, you're probably going to do fairly well. In the same sense, somebody who can do, basic hands-on healthcare.
Hmm.
One of the things that I highly recommend people consider is getting some background either as a nurse or as an EMT. So you know how to deal. Not so much a physician these days. MDs do very little with patients. They mostly have to fill out paperwork. but the people who actually provide hands-on patient care, I don't know what your local legislation is about alternative health care, but any of those that are legal in your jurisdiction, that's another really good one. Because if you can heal people, if you can treat their illnesses, if you can help their wounds heal and this kind of stuff, your chances of being treated as a very important person go way up.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the days when pirates were all over the Caribbean, okay, the societies that they set up on the islands that they controlled were probably the most lawless societies our species has ever had. Okay, it was a mess of pirates and people who catered to pirates, and people of both genders who catered to pirates in different ways, of course. And there was no law. If you got into two guys get into a fight, and one of them would kill the other, and it was just somebody would drag the body away, no big deal. There were people in those things who led charmed lives. If you were a doctor, if you were a shipwright and could repair ships, if you were a gunner, there were a couple of dozen things like that. Nobody would touch you at all because they knew their life might depend on your being able to do your skill down the road. They wanted to be in your good books, and so Captain Jack the Pirate, who would happily cut somebody's throat as much as look at him, is going to be friendly and because he wants your beer.
Mm-hmm. So there's these other things though that would be useful, like, so let's say counseling, trauma, responder, those kinds of things are like nice to haves. It seems like probably people can't pay for that, but maybe you'd get maybe somebody would give you a chicken every once in a while if you help them out, that kind of thing.
And that's where that gift economy comes in. You also end up with people tend to have lots of different skills, and that's really important. In modern industrial society, we tend to think of having just one skill set.
Mm-hmm.
And we can afford that in modern industrial society. As deindustrialization picks up, not so much.
Right. So being handy, being able to have your basic skills like growing some food, good first aid, facilitation skills, maybe. What do you think of large animal vet? That's been one we've been trying to get our kids to get into.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no. If you, especially if you can take care of cattle and horses and so on, without necessarily having all the latest stuff from the pharmaceutical industry. Literally, your local warlord, Attila the Hun, who came next door and got the beer. His horse may need some help. If you can if you can keep his horse strong and healthy, Attila is your friend.
So what do you think about all those like Mad Max, you talk about the salvage economy,
salvage economy.
Salvage economy. But like my question was, how do we know what's gonna? You always see them like salvaging and making these. I think of Mad Max. They make these different cars and they do these different things. But it's like, no, really, when are we going to be at the skyscraper salvage kind of state, and what are we going to do with all the stuff?
No, we're already there in some places. Look at what's happening in Detroit now, where people are going into ruined houses and stripping out all the copper. We're already in the opening stages of the salvage economy. It's just that there's going to be more and more and more of it. When you go to a used junk shop and buy some piece of technology or something that you want there, you're engaged in the salvage economy. When you donate something to a charity store, you've just taken part in the salvage economy. It's already there in a basic sense. The thing is, it's going to ramp up as the production of new goods begins to decline. The reuse of old goods is continuing to ramp up. And as the quality of new goods continues to decline, that's, of course, a very important pattern as well. We're already beginning, it's, as with so much of the situation, it's so easy to think of, well, when is it going to happen? It's happening.
Right.
It starts little bit at a time, one stair step after another. And so while everyone's sitting around waiting for, Mad Max to show up, his kid's sister, mildly disturbed Maxine, let's say, okay, it's actually all over the place already.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, so the other response to catabolic collapse you talk about is like lifeboat communities. People are they're gonna make themselves, an earth ship or whatever they're called. But you know that we're transitioning to an agrarian society. So this idea of well, and you do talk about like examples of, guess what, it never works. History shows us. But can you just define agrarian society and paint a picture of what an agrarian society of the future, maybe like 100, 150 years from now, what does that look like? When I think of agrarian society, I think of like, it's really old timey in my head. It's hard to imagine it with salvage, with skyscrapers with all the copper pulled out and all the glass down in the background. Like,
Yeah,
what's it
I,
going to look like?
I want you to imagine a Victoria suburb of the future. Okay, the houses were like 100 years from now, 100 to 300 years from now. The old houses have been torn down, most of them. The lumps of concrete broken out of the out of the ground and stacked to use as building materials. The houses are a mixture of salvage stuff from some of it from the skyscrapers, some of it from elsewhere, but and recently produced things. They're small. We are not talking 18-room houses here. We're talking 2-room shacks.
Hmm.
Okay, we are talking people who are maybe 95% of the population are engaged in producing food, whether they're growing crops, whether, let's see, 1 to 300 years, the fish supply is going to start restocking itself. So there may be some fishing going on. There will be livestock, certainly. Another good reason for you to work on that on large animal veterinary services, because there's going to be cattle and goats. They're going to need your help. But 95% of people are working indirectly to produce food, because that's what it takes when you don't have fossil fuels. Is there any in this little village of a dozen small houses in what used to be a prosperous suburb? Does anyone know how to read? Probably not. Does anyone know what electricity is? Well, we heard a legend about that a long time ago. And we're talking about the equivalent of a third world peasant lifestyle. Okay, this does not necessarily sound too appealing, but I'm sorry, that's kind of what we've built for ourselves at this point.
Right. We want to plan for the future we're going to get, not the one we wish we'd have. So we're talking about there's no more fossil fuel.
We're getting the future that our choices have made inevitable. We could have chosen otherwise. There are still things that could be done to improve that situation, and we can get some of those in a bit. But generally speaking, we're talking about if you can imagine the southern end of Vancouver Island dotted with little villages, total population again maybe about 5% of what it is today. The village is almost entirely devoted to subsistence agriculture and livestock raising, a little bit of fishing and things like that, if the fish stocks have started to recover. And that's just the way things are. There may be a town of a few thousand people located someplace near where Victoria is. You got a good harbor. Although what will happen with that with the sea level rising sharply is an interesting question. But doubtless there will be a harbor town, and there will be a few thousand people there, and there probably will be people there who read and write, and there will be some specialized craftspeople and so on. And the whole place, to judge by poetry from the last set of Dark Ages, the major thing that everyone will think, because there will be the ruins off that way, and people will go walking through those going, wow, those must have been built by giants. Who were these strange beings who built these things? There are these legends about, and legend is most of what people have. Stories you tell at night after the workday is over. And so it's very difficult for a lot of people to imagine nowadays, because we have bought into the mythology of progress. We think that it's as though we've convinced ourselves that spring becomes summer, and summer becomes uber summer, and uber summer becomes uber summer, and it just gets warmer and sunnier and more lovely forever. Unfortunately, what we're learning is that what comes after summer is fall.
I think what is actually even the hardest part about that scenario for me is accepting that we could forget We could forget about, the heyday. That books will disintegrate, and with no internet, that we will just forget. And so the Dark Ages is a very difficult, I actually don't think a lot of people know when we say the Dark Ages, I don't think they know what that means. It doesn't mean that there had been no civilization yet. There had been no, great
Mhm.
achievements. It means that we had them and then we forgot, right? Do you want to sort of paint that picture for people that this has happened before too?
Oh yes. Say, well, when we speak of the last round of Dark Ages, we're talking about what happened after the fall of the Roman Empire. Okay, I want you to imagine Imperial Rome. This is a city with 20-story tall apartment buildings. Okay, it's a city with running water and flush toilets for the rich, but they existed. It's a city where taxi cabs had meters on them. You put in the coin and this kind of stuff. Seriously, the Romans had that technology. You had this immense body of literature and philosophy and science and art and music, and it was all unsustainable because they were overstraining. It was resting on, and of course, in those days, it was a fossil fuels as agriculture, and it was resting on an agricultural basis that couldn't be sustained. They were overexploiting their soils, and there were a whole range of social changes that built up, and eventually the whole thing came crashing down over a period of about 300 years. And so you ended up in, say, 800 AD, 400 years after the fall of Rome. No, actually 325. And here's the Colosseum. And here are these, what's left of these big old Roman temples and buildings and things like that. And there are goats grazing on the grass around them. And the entire city has a population of a few thousand people. And a few of them are literate. And there are monks in this monastery, and that monastery, who are copying by hand old manuscripts. And that's the only reason any Roman literature got to us, because those monks worked, from sun up to sundown, copying out manuscripts by hand on a parchment. But everything else, you've got a living to make. You have to get up early and herd those goats, or plow the fields, or do whatever else you do to keep your family fed. And besides, that the people who built all these things were wicked.
Oh,
And they were wicked, and they were destroyed by God because they were wicked. Now, I want you to imagine 500 years from now, or 400 years, or 325 years from now, people looking back on our civilization and saying, okay, these people had all these amazing things, and they used up the world's fossil fuel supplies, wrecked the climate, wrecked the biosphere, flooded the world with rising sea levels, caused all of these catastrophes for their own children and grandchildren. Do you think they're going to think of us as angels? No, we are going to be the orcs and Nazgul of their legends.
Do you worry that because we don't have a religious monastic tradition, that the good stuff isn't going to be carried forward?
The Romans didn't have a monastic tradition either. It's monastic traditions spring up in the opening periods of Dark Ages.
Oh, okay. So we'll have more zealots. Awesome. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, it's real simple. Monasteries work because they live at a level of absolute poverty. So they're very economical. You become a monk in the church, whether it's a Christian monk or a Buddhist monk or what have you. You're giving up all property. You own nothing. You are embracing a life of poverty, chastity, and obedience.
That's easier to do if nobody has anything, if nobody else
Exactly. Exactly. That's not that big a deal if the alternative is herding goats from sun up to sundown, right? Okay.
Right.
So that's why monasteries really pick off, because people go, well, let's see, I don't own anything anyway. And so you go become a monk, and you work at, you're working. You're still going to be putting in long hours, but there's a lot of things you don't have to worry about. And the monastery will take care of you, and you will take care of your fellow monks. And so it becomes very popular in the opening stages of the Dark Ages. And you start getting these monasteries popping up. And being in monasteries, you got to give the monks something to do. And so copy that. Now, one advantage we have this time around that they didn't have in medieval Europe, that they did have during the last round of Dark Ages in China and Japan. Okay, printing.
Mm.
In China and Japan, woodblock printing had become an ordinary way of producing documents. They literally carve a piece of wood with the characters on it, and then you run ink over it, lay on a piece of rice paper, pull it off, you have a copy.
Mm.
Do it again 100 times, you have 100 copies.
Mm-hmm.
Now, movable type, which is of course the kind of printing that was invented by Gutenberg and launched the print revolution back in the 14th century, that's even easier to work with. But even if all you have is woodblock printing, you can save much more because, if you produce your monastic, your guy in the monastery, girl, woman in the monastery, work both
Mm-hmm.
ways. Instead of just copying every individual piece, copy out by hand, you carve a woodblock, or you set up the type.
Mm-hmm.
Print thump. Okay, now we have 100 copies of this, of this book from the old days. Makes
Mm-hmm.
the survival of documents much easier now. And since hand printing on hand presses has actually become kind of a thing again in North America.
Mm-hmm.
I have every reason to hope that's so that the monastery, the little monastery up a ways from that little village that we talked about earlier. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and what religion it is, I have no idea yet. But
Mm-hmm.
that monastery might have their own little printing press. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's Brother Jerome in there, and his particular craft is printing, and it's happened as an apprentice as the younger monks who are really getting into this. But his particular craft, he's producing, batches of 50 or 100 copies of this old book.
So staying with this, uh, the village and the community, and we've got the sort of the monastic folks all cloistered over there. It seems like then, for the next few generations, for sure, but even more a little later, choosing where to live is really important. And I know you personally, you've moved a few times in the last 10 years. And so I'm curious if, could you share a little bit about the different locations you've lived and maybe some of the pros and cons you discovered? Like, what made you decide to choose those places? What are some of the factors when you're like, okay, close to the city, but not in the city, like a little bit of land, but not too far? Like it's a little bit of a fine. I know it's very personal, but I'm just curious, what's your process been in the last decade?
Okay, the thing is, my moving was not done for the sake of trying to find a doomstead, trying to find a place to live out the long descent, because I will not live out the long descent. Okay, it's 1 to 300 years. I'm 56. I'm not going to live to the age of 356.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
So you're
so
not that worried right now about.
I'm no. So basically, I have so far seen some of the opening rounds of the long descent, and I'll see more of them. But the moves that I made, I mean, my wife and I left Seattle finally in 2004 because it was simply unaffordable.
Mm.
It was getting unaffordable, and there were it's become a very unhealthy place. They have huge problems with black mold there. Huge amounts of really cheap construction, lots of mold getting into buildings, and so on. And my wife has bad allergies, and so we needed to relocate. We originally went to a small place in Southern Oregon, a town by the name of Ashland.
Which I have visited. Very interesting place, I must say.
It is a very interesting place. It was worth trying. It was frankly too far away from anything for me to make it work with regard to my writing career.
Mm.
And since while the long descent has not yet finished, which it won't for 1 to 300 years, I still have a living to make. And
Mm-hmm.
so we left. We went from there to a small town in far western Maryland, up in the Appalachians, a very pleasant place called Cumberland, and ended up leaving there as transportation links were starting to break down. There were a range of other things, and we ended up settling in southern New England, partly because it's very convenient for me to be able to get access to a lot of speaking gigs and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Partly because it was nice to get to a maritime climate again. I'm not
Mm.
I'm not really cut out for the continental climate.
Mm-hmm.
And also, this is an area where there's a lot of organic food. There's a lot of small farms.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of the kind of thing that I want to encourage, and I can encourage it with my things like where I shop. I mean, we have a lovely farmers market 3 blocks away from our apartment right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's and the thing is, we could have moved to 24 other places at least. There's a lot of flexibility. Now, the younger you are, and the more of the long descent you're going to see, the more careful you probably have to be. But even so, there is no one size fits all answer.
Mm-hmm.
For some people, moving to a little town, moving out in the middle of nowhere is probably the best possible thing they could do. For others, there some of us are city kids, and you don't necessarily want to be in a really big city, but a small to mid-sized city can be a very safe place to be. In particular, when law and order starts breaking down in the countryside, which it generally does as civilizations contract, the cities tend to remain much more stable.
Yeah, I guess they
so
have their own kind of balancing ecosystem, whereas the country is
exactly.
like, gosh, nobody's there to witness, unless maybe you're in
Exactly.
a like really tight knit little village. But you did mention food hubs and transportation hubs. You didn't mention so much. Well, you did say climate. So do you just kind of go with the philosophy that there's like environmentally speaking, from a climate perspective, whether it's fires, hurricanes, tsunamis, like there's no really great safe place anymore?
There is no safe place. This, the biosphere of the whole planet has been disrupted. Okay, so and I don't recommend trying to move to Mars. I'm perfectly willing to send Elon Musk there, but that's about it. I don't recommend it for anyone else. So no, you're on the planet Earth. I would encourage people not to settle on really low-lying ground right near the ocean, because you're probably going to have seawater in your living room within a few years. But other than, and there's a few other obvious things like that. If you don't handle hot temperatures well, don't move to the south.
Enough of this sort of snowbird lifestyle thing, because that's not going to be very pleasant for
no,
and
I'm
going to go to Florida. It's like, guess what? You're gonna you're going to expire very quickly.
You can't. Well, and the thing is, so is Florida. It will not take that much more melting of the Greenland and West Antarctic ice caps until large portions of Florida are literally underwater. Florida is
so if you have
incredibly
children,
low-lying.
if you're older and you're not going to be as mobile later, or if you have children, those are probably more careful decisions. But it sounds like
exactly
you're kind of like, well, I'm not going to I'm not going to live to the end, so I don't have to plan for that scenario yet. It's
exactly.
just, am I going to stage of my life?
Yeah. I need to locate someplace that will likely have the resources that my wife and I are going to need for the rest of our lives, and then find a place. I mean, our apartment is on the ground on which it's built. It's about 80 feet above sea level, so we're okay.
Well, and a big part of the future, you say, is learning the art of doing without. And I'm curious. So then, which absurd extravagance of current modern day life irks you the most personally? I want to know, John Michael Greer, former agrarian, what's your pet peeve?
How could one choose? There are so many. Let's see. I mean, would one talk about the people who climb into their SUVs to drive 3 blocks to the health club to get the exercise that they could get by walking 3 blocks to the health club? Do we want to talk about, I love the earth and that's why I'm going to go, climb on board a jetliner and dump vast amounts of pollution into the air so I can go see some pristine natural environment, thus destroying it in the process? I've heard varying claims about just the precise accuracy of this, but I have read in several places that if you take a plane load of tourists from Los Angeles to Cairo, Egypt to see the Great Pyramid and fly them back, that flight, both ways, takes as much energy as it took to build the Great Pyramid. Okay?
Yeah.
That's an absurd amount of energy. Another great one high on my list of please is the bread machine. Now, making bread, okay, it's a simple, pleasant, easy process. It's fun. It doesn't take much time. I mean, you need the bread a little bit, then you cover it, okay, and then you punch it down, you let it rise again. Why do you need a machine? Why do you need to drop $100 on this clanking monstrosity. It's going to need to be cleaned, by the way, and uses electricity and uses scarce resources in the manufacture and the raw materials, so that you don't have to get dough on your hands, or what?
Yeah, it's like, do you hate the feel of lovely, soft, like, almost like a baby belly? Do you just really despise the smell of like yeastiness
A
as it
fresh
comes
rising
out of the
dough? Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, just who came up with this stupidity? It's just that there's all kinds of examples like that. Um, I haven't yet seen anything quite to the level of stunning blindness as the immense SUV that rolled by me one day in Ashland, Oregon. It did this, one of these things the size of a tank, and it rolled by, and on the back bumper of this immense vehicle with onboard television on the rear for the rear seats, and power everything, and was a bumper sticker saying "Live simply, that others may simply live."
Oh, yeah, I can see why you had to get out of Dodge there. Yeah.
Right there, you see why our civilization is hurtling down the slope of the long descent, because
Mhm.
that level of blindness to the consequences of our own actions is what
Mhm.
leads that's what caused Rome to fall.
Mhm. And the lack of irony in doing that is just like
Yeah, the fact that somebody would do that and not catch the irony, wouldn't even blush, would think what a worthy sentiment it is. Yeah, that happened in Ashland, Oregon. And Ashland is an interesting place, but I have to say, I saw a lot of things like that there. It was very fashionable to have solar panels on your roof in Ashland. And I recall walking by one house that had a fine rack of solar panels facing the street, nicely displayed so you could see them. The house faced north. So those solar panels did not absorb 1 watt worth of sunlight. They were just there as a fashion statement.
Oh
And
God, that
and
hurts.
that
It hurts.
it does, but this is the kind of thing that we see in the kind of faux environmentalism of the well-to-do.
Mhm.
It's all it's all virtue signaling. And
Yeah.
so we have, if we wonder why so many other people don't take it seriously, that's why they don't take it seriously, because they look at things like I was saying, okay, the activists don't take it seriously. If they really thought we were in that kind of trouble, they wouldn't do that.
Right. So let's talk about the chapter where you give the you give a synopsis of sort of 10 first steps towards sustainability. And it's an excellent list, but there's 2 points that you suggest that I would like to share with our listeners and have you talk about them a bit. Can you first tell our listeners why adopting an obsolete technology is important?
Okay, this is really simple. The more modern a technology is, by and large, the more energy it uses, the more resource it uses, the more wasteful it is, and the more waste it produces. Okay, so compare, for example, a modern electric egg beater-oid thing to an old-fashioned cranked hand beater.
Mhm.
Okay, the hand beater is a much simpler technology. It's easier to repair. It's easier to maintain. It doesn't use electricity. It doesn't have, involve complex plastics or anything like that. It's a lump of metal.
Mhm.
And so if you adopt that technology, you've just downscaled part of your life in a way that's going to make sense in the deindustrial age.
So is it more about the habit of it than the actual saving of oil and that sort of thing? Or
It's
because
both.
okay.
It's it's both. And the thing is, one of the things that I used to encourage people to do. In fact, it was one of our requirements in our study program when I was the head of the Ancient Order of Druids in America. We asked people to make 3 changes in their lives to cut down on their ecological footprint, the burden they placed on the biosphere. We didn't tell them which 3 changes. They came up with the changes. They chose them and stuck with them for a year.
Mhm.
And we found that very often, once somebody had done that, they would do more because they've
Mm.
been broken out of the mindset that says you can't actually change anything. You have to do what the television tells you. And
Mhm.
so once you get in the habit, then it starts having serious impact on your resource use. You start
Mhm.
putting less of a burden on the planet. You've taken to using the egg beater. The egg beater's fine. You have no trouble with the egg beater. It's a perfectly fine. I'm going to
Mhm.
throw out the bread machine. I could donate to a charity shop and just start kneading the bread myself. Okay,
Hmm.
you just chucked another energy wasting habit. Okay, well, this is fun. The bread's better, and I like the experience. And what else can I change? Because once people get into the habit of recognizing they have the freedom not to progress, you don't have
Yeah.
to do you don't have to do the latest thing just because the television says you have to. You
Hmm.
can go back to something your grandma did, which probably works better and tastes better.
Well, and it's a bit subversive, I guess, to just say just because I want to, and like you said, the television isn't going to tell me what to do, and it is a bit. You do kind of break. It is like asking a friend, "Can I borrow your car?" It breaks the social contract, and it brings you sometimes into more intimacy. So it could be intimacy with the bread, or with your neighbor, or just even with yourself. That sense of like, wow, look how conditioned I am towards doing it way, but maybe I'll try something a bit different this time. So what about exploring spirituality? You mentioned that as the last one. And I think for a lot of people who are reading a peak oil book, they're like, whoa, whoa, what? Wait, what? I'm supposed to explore my
No,
spirituality. Why?
it's very simple. It's really simple. The entire structure of the consumer economy is aimed at making us look for satisfaction outside ourselves. We're supposed to become happy by buying this product, this fizzy brown sugar water. Look at these sexy, attractive people having a great time because they're guzzling fizzy brown sugar water. You can be like them. No, you won't. You'll just be yourself guzzling fizzy brown sugar water and rotting your teeth out. Okay,
Mhm.
breaking that notion that happiness happiness is about products.
Mm.
Happiness is about having things, which is essential to our consumer economy. It's what keeps it running. So break that and say, no, happiness is an internal state. It has very little to do with which products I buy and very much to do with how I relate to myself, how I relate to the cosmos, how I relate to the powers, however I understand them, that govern the cosmos. That's what spirituality is about.
Mhm.
When you take up a spiritual practice, whatever it is, you're turning away from goods. You're turning away from stuff, turning toward that inner realm, which is where happiness actually comes from. This is something that everybody knows. Well, or used to know, maybe.
Mhm.
But that's why it's a very important thing, because it's when you can step back from the rat race that you stop being a rat.
Hmm. Well, that's the hope. But do you notice, though, like you talked about the experience in the small town in Southern Oregon? I don't want to keep, slagging that town, but it's like archetypal, right? But
It
so
is.
I had my friend Sarah on, Sarah Selecki, who wrote a book called Radiant Shimmering Light, and it's about how capitalism is co-opting spirituality. And so, like, for instance, I have an Instagram account and I post my wild crafting and my altars and ritual, because I do want people to see the social proof of like, no, this is me actually living in connection with the wheel of the year and that sort of thing. But at the same time, I got to make a living, so at the same time it's still marketing, and there's this like weird feeling of being part of the circumdrome of the internet, where it's like, yeah, spirituality is really important to me, being in right relationship with the land that I'm on, reducing my oil dependency, all of these things are very important to me. And yet it's all getting packaged still in capitalism. Like, this is a bit tangential, but I'm curious what you think
We
of.
live. No, the thing is, it's not tangential, and this is one of the things I was trying to talk about in the book, where I'm talking about that we're all living in a transitional state. We can't make the leap in a single moment into this other state that we might want to live in. Okay,
Mhm.
that we can't immanentize the eschaton. We
Mm.
all live with a foot in both worlds.
Mhm.
Okay, and we have to keep that balance between them, and it's not easy. There is no
Mhm.
simple, straightforward solution. There's no package that'll fix it. We live in a society that has all of these features, and and until that, as long as anybody who's listening to this will be alive, that's still going to be the case. The society will change, but it's probably going to keep its basic orientation fairly much the same.
Right.
But at the
So.
same time, we have to be able to kind of step back from that a little and do something else and build a part of our lives that isn't really part of that. We may use it, there may be that back and forth. I mean, yeah, I have to market myself too. I make my living by selling my books.
Mm-hmm.
And so, people who want to, people who want to practice Druidry, say, some of those are going to buy my books on Druidry, and I'm going to encourage them to buy those books on Druidry
Mm-hmm.
because that's what pays the bills. But at the same time, there's a lot of stuff that I do in my own life, having to do with my own spirituality, that is not packaged. That's
Mm-hmm.
part of my own life,
Mm-hmm.
and so just keeping that boundary state where you know what's on one side and what's on the other, and do what you have to do to get by in the material world, in the world of the present, while in your inner life beginning to lay the foundations for a world of the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I also hear you saying that, so we don't want to immanentize the eschaton, so don't catastrophize where we are right now, but also, uh, you know, let go of the expectation of some imminent arrival point of perfection
Mhm.
where we've
Mhm.
packaged our
Mhm.
lives in perfect alignment with our values. That's not it either.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that not only are you selling your Druidry books, but also I believe that you genuinely believe, and I genuinely believe that probably the world would be better cushioned to face deindustrialization if people were
Mhm.
buying Druidry books right now. So
Mhm.
legitimately,
Mhm.
this is a good response. So,
That's
that's
that's why I'm writing books on Druidry. That's why. I
perfect.
mean, I want people to buy my book, The Long Descent, and part of that is because it pays my bills, but part of it is because if you've read that book and paid attention to it, you're going to be braced and better positioned to deal with the changes that we're in the middle of right now.
Oh, it's changed my life. It's changed my partner's life for sure. Like we very much have been practicing, and it has taken about a decade. That the book's been out for
It
10
does.
years. We keep going back to it. We're still working on some parts of it, but yes, I would agree. Yeah. So technological triage is something I wanted to ask you about too, because it kind of shows up as you're getting into the last third of the book as well. Maybe just could you remind listeners what triage is like technically, and also what should we keep in mind then as we are transitioning to deindustrialization, like in terms specifically of like the technologies of today that we invest in, and which we wean ourselves from. What should we be keeping in mind and thinking about in the next decade or so? So it's been 10 years since this book came out, and like the iPhone, I didn't own an iPhone when I bought this book, and now I do a lot of my, now there's Instagram, I do a lot of my work on it. It's a big part of my career, in fact. So it's like, oh, as I'm thinking about the next 10 years and technological triage, how do we
hmm
decide what stays, what goes, what should we wean ourselves from?
Okay. Okay. So first of all, triage. The term triage was originally something that was used in the military medical corps in battlefield situations. You've got a stream of guys coming in with wounds, and some of them are going to make it whether they get immediate treatment or not, and some of them are not going to make it no matter what you do. But there's some who will die if they're neglected, and if you act, you can save their lives. And so triage is a process of sorting out what doesn't need to be saved, what can be saved, what's a goner.
Mhm.
And so that's it's a harsh metaphor, but that's what we need to start doing on technology. What is going to be around no matter what you do? What is a lost cause no matter what you do? And what is there that you might be able to save? And there is no universal here. It is very much a matter of the process that each person goes through. Of the technologies you have, which ones are going to sunset out? No question. Which ones are going to be around no matter what? Which ones do you personally want to invest the time and effort into saving? Well, is there an old technology you want to revive and start and help people get to work on it? Is there and that's how technological triage works. As far as the next 10 years, the shortage of crystal balls being what it is, I don't have a clear idea of what's going on. I do know that a lot of the very loudly ballyhooed technological quote advances unquote of the last decade have turned out to be rather more limited than expected. There are, you mentioned the iPhone, and there are of course a fair number of people who are using iPhones, but a significant number of people have gotten rid of theirs
Mhm.
and are going back to dumb phones, or
Mhm.
even as I do. I've never had a cell phone,
Mhm.
and I do. We're talking on a landline, and that's the kind of phone that I use. Um, And there are growing numbers of people who are doing that because they've picked up on the downsides, which are considerable, of the cell phones. And they're saying, no, here's the triage that I'm doing. I'm getting rid of that. In the same way, you remember when ebooks were going to sweep everything before them, and pretty soon that hasn't happened. They peaked at about 20% of the book market and have been falling steadily ever since. I have heard of many, many people who got rid of their libraries of printed books when they got their ebook reader, and then after about 6 months slapped themselves on the forehead saying, what was I thinking? And went and started picking up, buying books again, because ebooks have their limitations. And so exactly what's going to happen over the next decade is a really hard question to ask. Will there be new technologies introduced? Quite possibly. My guess is that more of the new technologies will flop.
Because maybe quicker turnover than ever before.
Very possible, yeah. Because the thing is, technology is this is, I'm about to speak a heresy. Extreme heresy, blasphemy against the great God progress. Technological progress is subject to the law of diminishing returns. Okay? So as you pile on one invention after another, the amount of benefit you get from each new invention does not go up. Quite the contrary, it goes down. A lot of the inventions, the hot new tech trends that are coming out nowadays, aren't worth having. Do you remember when Google launched the Google Glass?
Yeah.
Where people were going on with these eyeglasses that were, everything they looked at was being immediately live streamed to the web and all that kind of stuff. And it bombed. It bombed in a very big way. And so Google was left going, huh?
Well, it's interesting too, because you say ebooks have their limitations, and not the least of which is aesthetic. And Google goggles are the same, right? It's like you look like an idiot wearing these things. I'm like constantly, and people, looking at their phones, they look silly, So at some point, it's like there's hopefully some sort of aesthetic revival about to occur. In one of your essays, it's not in The Long Descent, but I think this essay kind of sidles right up along beside it. It certainly stands as very influential in this household that I'm in, that's for sure. This essay was called Peak Oil Advice from German Poets, and it can be found on the Mirrored blog. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But in that, you listed 3 things people can do today to change their lives to respond to peak oil and climate change and collapse and all that. Can you share those 3 things and why each of them is important? Because like I say, this is life-changing in terms of where we spend our time here at the Spanderson household.
Yeah, this is where you start. Learn one thing, give up one thing, save one thing. Okay, learn one thing. Most of us are incredibly specialized. We know we have very, very few general skills. We've gotten, say, job training in one narrow specialty, and that's all. And so we're very poorly positioned to deal with a rapidly changing economy, economic contractions, all kinds of things going on like that. This is, a lot of these very complex, very specialized job categories may not be around for much longer. So start learning things. Start learning practical skills. And it doesn't matter which one. Choose one. I said, growing vegetables, making soap, raising chickens, brewing beer, whatever. Learn how to do it. Pick it up, come up with something, run with it. Okay, that's learn. The second one, this is the one where people tend to wet themselves. Give up one thing. Okay? This is blasphemy. You're not supposed to give up anything. You're supposed to, quote, just do it, blah, blah, blah. That's the mindset that drives the consumer economy and is running the biosphere into the ground. Choose something that uses energy, that wastes resources, that's part of your life, and get rid of it. Okay? This is actually the one that I figured out first, and I figured it out in an odd way, which is that I happen to dislike television. It's not that I dislike the programs. I dislike watching little jerky images dancing around on a glass screen. It bores me. So I found that giving up television, getting rid of it. My wife and I have not had one basically in our very lives. And
You have a very
that's
old computer too, don't you? Like you're not
um,
like, even though you're a writer, you're not like, but I have to have the newest
all
Mac.
I need is something that will do Windows 97. Because
Right.
that's still what the publishers expect. Now, what I do from computers, I get used computers. I get computers that are going to be thrown out,
Mm.
and instead I get them and I use them until they die, and then I get another one.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what that means is that I'm taking a computer out of the waste stream. I'm
Mm-hmm.
decreasing the amount of e-waste that's being produced. Nobody's building a computer for me, so I'm not adding to the resource cost of computer production. And I generally get laptops that have that use just a trickle of energy and are kind of slow. I don't care. Again, it's a glorified typewriter for me.
Mm-hmm. And so can you think, we got rid of the car, right? And so
Uh-huh.
our alternative is,
That's a great one, yeah.
cycling, walking, co-op membership. What are some of the biggies that you would say, like, so there's television, we still have Netflix. I'm sorry, I can't help it, but it's like maybe
you can help it, but you don't choose to help it.
I'm
That's fine.
choosing not
That's
to.
fine.
That's right.
No. Accept it as your choice and decide. Okay, that's what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Air travel.
Yes.
Stop
Yes.
flying.
Yes.
Stop flying.
I'm so with
Um,
you. This is like, Ruben would only come to Europe with me when we decided that the reasonable amount of time for us to justify air travel to a different continent was 2 months. And it was like, we're
mhm,
going to have to figure out how to live basically for free for 2 months. Because he was like, I'm not getting on a plane for a joyride,
mhm,
like, and so it's a little bit tricky when we're like, oh, okay, this is for work, how should we, like, what should we justify? But yeah, when friends
mhm.
are like, oh, we're all going to go meet up in Hawaii, I'm like, I'm sorry, we can't be friends anymore. I'm joking, but it's just like, yeah, travel, I think we need to take that much more soberly. Like, it should be a tougher decision, I think, than it is for so many
Exactly.
people.
Yeah. Just be aware that when you climb aboard that plane, you're helping to melt the ice caps.
Yeah.
You're helping to make you've just helped cause another heat wave. Enjoy.
Yeah.
And so
So
because
have
that's
you been on a plane? Like, if you've had to justify it recently, is it what? It's for work? It's for
it's been a
education?
it's been a long time.
Mm.
Um, I had to do a couple of plane trips when I was Grand Archduke of AODA. It
Hmm.
was necessary for me to get out into various parts of the country to do various things as part of my official duties. And at that time, um, I lived in Ashland, which basically, well, it doesn't have train service.
Right. Yeah, because we had to
And
take the
so,
train to Portland to get to Ashland, then like have a friend drive us. So it
exactly,
sounds
yeah,
like for you it's the same kind of thing. Like, if you're going to get on a plane, it's because there's some call of duty.
there's yeah, exactly. There's a real reason. Let's see, in 2014, I needed to go to England to be part of a major event in the Druid community. Now, I love England. It's a great place. I would love to go there. I'm not going to go there on a plane unless there's a really good reason to do so. And in this case, there were very good reasons.
Hmm.
I had certain duties. I have, since I stepped down as Grand Archdruid, I've been on my feet and on trains and things like that.
Hmm.
Doubtless, I will again. There will again be some kind of situation where I need to travel
Hmm.
to another country. I hope at some point, frankly, what I wish I could do, I wish I could at this point could spare the time to go by sea.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's just so much. That just seems so much more pleasant. But we'll see what happens.
Hmm.
But the thing is, yeah, it needs not to be a casual decision. It needs not to be just what you do. Let's go meet up in Hawaii. Sorry, I'm not going to be there.
Right. Hmm.
And let's take the bus down to Newport instead. There are
Yeah.
beaches there.
So is there anything you'd add to the list of 3 things? The learn one
No,
thing, get rid of one thing. Oh, sorry, I didn't let you finish. There's another thing.
no. It's the third one. Yeah, save one thing. Look at
Save one
something
thing.
that's likely to be lost in the long descent, and do what you can to save it.
Such as.
Well, for example, it so happens that you can do an enormous amount of very complex mathematics with a slide rule.
Mhm.
Okay,
Slide
a
rule.
slide rule.
I
It's
don't
a
even
slide rule.
kind of remember what that is. I can't picture
Yeah,
one in my head.
exactly. Look it up online sometimes. They're quite interesting little things. They require some skill to use, but this is rocket science. Okay.
So it's it's not
The
an abacus, but it's like a travel kind of version of that. I can do
No,
math
no,
really fast.
it
No, it's
looks
totally
it looks
different.
like it looks like a ruler with a middle section that slides back and forth, a little glass thing that slides back and forth over it.
Oh yeah, we had one in our house when I was a little kid. We used to kind of play
Yeah,
around with that, but
exactly.
I never used
Everybody did.
it.
Everybody. It was a very, very common thing to have. People took classes on it in high school.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's a slide rule. And again, this is rocket science. Most of the numbers the number crunching that put human boot prints on the moon were done with slide rules. If you have some basic facility with a slide rule, you can do amazingly complex mathematics with it, all kinds of engineering, things like that. I actually put a fair amount of energy at one point in the Archstrom report to my old blog to encouraging people to take up the slide rule again,
Hmm.
in the hopes that 300, 500, 600 years from now, just enough would be remembered of it that could be reinvented, or somebody would find one and say, oh, look at this, and here's this old crumbling book on how to use it.
You're right.
Wow, okay. And the civilizations that will rise on our ruins all of a sudden have a tool they can use to to do serious engineering, to do serious scientific calculations, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Slide rules can be made using very simple technologies. They do not require fossil fuels, and so that was one example. Another example is amateur radio.
Hmm.
And
not podcasts, radio.
Not podcasts. We're talking ham radio. The kind of things. Typically, when there's some kind of really ghastly natural disaster, okay, a big chunk of Florida is hammered to the ground by a hurricane. The first messages that come out are from these old harried retired engineers
Mm-hmm.
who throw something. Who if they they either just bring out their boxes and rig up an antenna, or if everything's destroyed, they piece together a radio out of spare parts on the spot, get some electricity in, and sending messages in Morse code. That's a technology that again could, although it was not developed until the end of the 19th century, really in the early 20th century, before it really got any kind of distance, it would have been possible to make a basic radio transmitter and receiver with the sort of technology that was available to a good medieval alchemist. Okay, so if that technology survives, if the idea of radio communications and some simple way of making it work, if that survives, then people 1,000 years from now are going to have ways to communicate across very long distances.
Well, and we talked about the printing press, for instance. I'm thinking like, gosh, what would I do without email? How would I run a business without email? I couldn't, but I could. I got into letterpress for a while. It's like, oh, if I could get the silk screening and have some materials to make dyes or paints or whatever inks, then I could make posters and pamphlets, that kind of thing. What do you think of cultural conservation through, oral traditions of stories and songs, or language revitalization, that kind of stuff? Do you see that as important?
All of these are important. All of those are normal parts of the way that human beings respond to decline and fall. And so, that's what we're dealing with. So this is, all of our ancestors have been through the same thing. Oral traditions are great. They're very, they are. It's really, storytelling is the oldest human technology. It's our original information technology. And when we take the time to learn it, we're good at it. So that's a very important thing. Also, there's all kinds of stuff that we can do. And again, when I say learn one thing, give up one thing, save one thing, I'm not telling anyone which one to do. You got to follow your heart in that. You got to say, okay, what is the thing that I want? What is the thing that I feel drawn to learn? What is the thing that I decide I'm ready to give up? What is the thing that matters enough to me that I'm going to work to save it?
And then so we've been working that system. We keep doing that, on an ongoing basis in our household. Would you add anything to that list, or what would you recommend as then the next 3 habits what are the next 3 things after learn one thing, get rid of one thing, save one thing?
Learn something else, give something else up. save
Just
something
keep
else.
doing it. Just wash,
Just keep
rinse,
doing
repeat.
it.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
That sounds good. We'll keep doing that. So, I've asked you a few times now about grief and rage, but my last question today is a little different. I think considering this topic, what I'd really like to know is how do you personally seek joy and fun these days? Like what brings you laughter even in the midst of such dire times and topics?
The thing is, it's I don't really have to go chasing fun and laughter. I enjoy being alive. It beats the stuffing out of the alternative. Um, if I want laughter, well, these days I can watch U.S. politics because a clown show such as the one, and I mean by that bipartisan, of course. You know, we have a three-ring clown show which the P.T. Barnum could only have dreamed, going on 24/7 in the United States right now. And so frankly, that causes me a great deal of laughter. And I'm not sure why everyone else takes it so seriously. If I may just, interject, Donald Trump is just a politician. That's all he is. Hillary Clinton was just a politician. All of these other buffoons are just politicians. They're not vast archetypal shadows blotting out the starlight forever or what have you. They're just a bunch of politicians. And both they and their opponents are frankly remarkably silly.
But don't you find sometimes that the impact of having such buffoonery causes you to feel disappointment in humans? Like, do you not find that overwhelming sometimes?
I set the bar low for human endeavor. We are a bunch of social primates. We are not that smart. We are not these vast godlike beings that we sometimes when we're like drunk or stoned or have been smoking our own egos a little too much, like to convince ourselves. We're just a bunch of social primates. And yeah, we do a lot of very silly things. The buffoons we have now are doing no more damage than the very, very serious figures we had not that long ago. And it's just, when you realize that what the process we're going through, the process of the long descent, is normal. This is part of the normal life cycle of a civilization. It's not, this horrible intrusion out of nowhere. How can this be happening? The great god Progress, has promised us a Star Trek future metastasizing across the galaxy. No, there was no promise made. This is the way civilizations mature and age and die. We're going through a perfectly normal process. That's one thing that takes care a lot of the upset, just realizing this is normal. If you can imagine that we lived in a society where everyone was taught that you don't get old and die, okay? You just stay youthful and healthy and vigorous and sexy and active forever. Okay?
That's so like this society.
There's there's quite a bit of that, of course. And every person was noticing, as they passed a certain age, they start noticing wrinkles and gray hair. And everything they've been taught is that this doesn't happen, this can't happen. It's a sign of a dreadful disease and you must spend lots of money on your doctor right away. Okay? And they'll cure it. And nothing cures it. People would work themselves up into a profound state of misery and worry and fear and despair and every other kind of nasty emotion. And if they found out, oh no, this is normal. You've been being lied to the whole time. This is normal. This is the normal arc of the human life cycle. There are benefits as well as losses at each stage in the cycle, and this is how it goes. Don't worry about it. There's an immense sigh of, once you actually accept that, there's an incredible sigh of relief. The same is true about a civilization. Our civilization, past its peak some time ago, is now in a perfectly normal decline and will wind down and bottom out in a dark age 100 to 300 years from now. And that's the way things are. That doesn't mean we've failed. That doesn't mean it's their fault over there. It is all of this histrionics, all the moaning and shrieking and whining and rage and dread and despair is wasted effort because this is normal. It's healthy.
It just doesn't feel good, but it's sort of like it's change, but in the inevitable direction. So you have like a deep deep, abiding acceptance at all times, which makes it probably easier to feel, as you say, the joy at the positives at each level. Like, look at all this beautiful culture you've conserved. Look at all the connection you have with your food and your sense of place and a sense of purpose and contribution in your work because you're able to
Exactly.
see what other people are
Exactly.
not seeing.
There's all of these marvelous things, and you're only going to be alive for X number of years anyway.
Right. Yeah.
So you're going to, and the thing is, that's also very liberating to know that, to actually grapple with the fact that you're only going to live for a certain period of time, and then it's someone else's problem.
Right. Right. So you might as well leave the place as tidy as you
Yeah,
can.
yeah. Leave the place tidy. Do some good while you're here. Have some fun while you're here, and relax, because you are just a social primate. Okay. You are
Mhm.
not God. You are not a hero in spandex. But you are not. It is not your job to save the world. It's your job to move with the times and to deal with deal with what this phase of history has to offer, both of good and of ill, and try to make things a little better for people while you're doing it.
Well, thank you very much for all your contribution to making things a little better. As I said, The Long Descents has been just a seminal work for me, and I can say that for my
I'm glad to
partner
hear it.
Ruben as well. And I highly recommend people purchase it new. You'll reread it several times. But thank you so much, John, for being on the show again and giving us a highlight reel of the book. Thanks so much.
You're welcome, and thank you. I've appreciated being on.
Well, congratulations to John Michael Greer on the 10th anniversary of The Long Descent, a fantastic book that has certainly shaped the last 10 years of my life, the last nine years or so. Much gratitude, much respect to that giant of an elder of the peak oil thinking, and how I'm just so grateful for the education I've received. I hope everyone enjoyed that conversation, and I need to process and debrief with the man who first handed me the book, my good husband, Ruben Anderson. Folks, welcome back to the show, Ruben.
Hello, it's good to be back.
And I just also want to acknowledge yet again that you introduced me to the work of the former archdruid, and I swooped in and sort of wooed him and struck up relationship. And I'm the one who gets to have these great conversations, and you get the table scraps. But I'm curious what it was like for you listening to that conversation, since you have also been so influenced by John Michael Greer. And sometimes it's nice to just check back in with our teachers a bit of time later.
Yeah.
What did you think? He basically stands behind everything he wrote, wouldn't change a word, it sounds like.
Yeah, it is incredible to think it's been 10 years, and yet also incredible to think it's been only 10 years. I think for me it's been a little longer, because he always writes his books on his blog, so you might have 2 or 3 years of him thinking these things before the book actually comes out. So maybe that's why I feel incredulous at the idea that I first ran into this in 2008. But it is certainly still just what a framework. Like, so much of his work since then has been more kind of going back in and detailing aspects of it, writing more books about more kind of about sections of it. But that book really, it lays it out. It makes it plain.
It's pretty comprehensive. If you're a person who's like, I've been thinking about sustainability for a long time, and what we need is more education, and if we could just galvanize the political will, fucking shelve that shit.
Yeah.
Read this book, and you'll be like, now that we look at this historical framework and we look around at the evidence, it's pretty hard to deny that we are somewhere in that 150 year to 300 year decline. Now, what did you think about his numbers? You and I have talked a bit about how when you read the book, you're not thinking about people dying in fires in Greece. You're not thinking about the sudden overnight collapse of 90% of a penguin colony on some island. You're thinking about this kind of decline. It's the long descent, but these punctuated massive losses. And then what he once again makes it, he has this equanimity about him, right? He's just been thinking about this so long. His thought is so refined that he's like, no, this is what I was talking about. We're going to go, stair step down to about 5% of our current world's population sometime in the next few centuries. Sounds drastic since we're at billions. And I'm a person who actually feels like that's what should happen. But it's like, when you put it that way, that sounds pretty harsh. Yeah,
5% is a lot. 95% of humans not being here. 95% of this many humans. So, and I phrase it that way because he points out that just sort of, we read the book, I think it was Radical Simplicity, where the guy calculated that if every couple just had one child, world population would be down to 1 billion people in 100 years.
Yeah, I was feeling pretty hopeful about that 10 years ago. I was like, yep, I'm just going to have my one. And all people, it's all about education. People just had this knowledge. You see, there's problems there.
Yeah, but it shows that how, as Greer said, that this doesn't have to be a zombie apocalypse. That just simple reductions in replacement rate can have pretty massive population impacts. There is, a 95% population die-off is certainly seen in examples. It's stunning to think of for humans, which, as he said, like, we are a weed species, right? We're like rats and cockroaches and deer, just incredibly competent.
Very successful.
Very flexible. And again, I love how he put it, like, so much of how I think was framed by him, and in many ways this book. He pointed out that humans with nothing more than a stone axe populated every continent on the planet. Like, incredible. So when people set their hair on fire at the idea that maybe we can't have a smartphone, it's foolish, right? It's ridiculous. So the population drop certainly is challenging. But
it's still arresting.
If I were to argue with it, I'd be arguing for, 95% drop is ridiculous. We're only going to have 90% drop, right? Like it's,
or 50. Any of this means we really have to become more skillful with death work and grief and accepting loss. That's just what it is now.
So I really was still impressed by his framework and by how it stands up. Really very useful. I was also reflecting because I ran into John Michael Greer in my last relationship, and this
with your former
with
partner.
my former partner,
not just like a friendship, but long term.
My last long-term relationship, my previous long-term relationship,
which I've surpassed. That
in length
of being with you now.
That's right.
So I'm
longest term.
You're like more invested here now. But it's true that I caught you on a rebound.
I don't know about a rebound. Let's not pick nits on that right now. But the Greer's writing and its connections to the other reading I was doing, the work I was doing at that time in the sustainability department at the City of Vancouver. It was a lot more challenging for my former partner to deal with that and to deal with me thinking about that. So it was more challenging
for your relationship, harder on your relationship.
Much. Greer and his thinking and this world of thinking created a lot more tension within that relationship than it does within this relationship.
That was a different time.
It was a different time. And everyone's different people now, but it's something that Sharon Astick doesn't really write about this much anymore, but she looked a lot at the difficulty, the impact that someone kind of becoming collapse aware and starting to prepare a bit or change their lifestyle a bit, how that can create huge tensions within relationships. One person just wants to sell their house and buy up a bigger house and get another car on lease and, you know,
Go
just
on vacation
keep on the treadmill. And the other person is being like, no, let's scale down. Let's reduce our debt. Let's plant a garden, you know.
Yeah, let's think about burying some money or whatever. Yeah, Sharon Astick wrote about that, and also former guest on the show and episodes about it, Carolyn Baker, who wrote the book Love in the Age of Ecological Apocalypse. I think one of the things that probably made me very receptive was that I was going through a personal collapse at that time. I had a business that got washed away in the 2008-2009 global recession. I had to go through a bankruptcy. It was, you know, an incredible shock and a huge blow to my identity, and it was a collapse of my world. It was, and it was a collapse of my faith in what was holding up this world. You know, like easy access to credit and loans and that kind of thing, and just how quickly. And my business at the time was, you know, based on ecological values, you know, sustainable merchandise, responsible trade, and I was stunned at how quickly the wealthy, you know, catered. It was like quite high end and high design, but I was very stunned at how quickly people who could afford to, let's say, shop their values would cease to do so. So my faith in conscious capitalism evaporated with
also
my
washed
business.
Away.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was pretty receptive to reading something like The Long Descent. Let's just pause for Mona to settle, because she's clicking and she's back at her dog toy. She just really loves doing ruminations. So she loves the sound of your mellifluous voice. It makes her want to chew on her Kong like nothing else. So yes, there can be a lot of strain, but we sure found some harmony.
Yeah, but it is, I think it's important for people to hear if they're coming to grips with this and maybe aren't, you know, certainly not on pace with their family or with their friends. You know, that would be a miracle of wonders if they were. But
if you had a whole community that was totally collapse aware, oh my God, tell us where you live. Let's
to
move.
also be out of sync with, you know, your loved one or your best friend, and it's just it's hard. Yeah,
it's very isolating.
Yeah.
And that's tricky because, you know, you're taking on what can, Myrna Lewis calls like taking on more than your fair share of the collective angst, right? You're like very sensitive to it. And some people, they live their life as though they don't have to be, and that can be very lonely and crazy making. Yeah.
And it's also, it can be a wonderful bonding experience to agree on so much of the shape of this, and to have a shared language, to be able to make jokes about zombies, while knowing that none of us really believe in zombies, you know, but that we do believe in a quickly constraining future, to put it
and
delicately.
That we are keen to share best and most promising practices for how are we bringing people along who are not as psychologically and emotionally and spiritually prepared, and like kind of doing our work more, you know, you kind of move beyond the like personal development and the need to self-actualize when you adopt this, when you accept the reality of what's happening. You start to adopt a more preparatory worldview, things like attachment and facilitation and you know, trauma response and community organizing and things like that. They just take on a different texture and tone, and it's so lovely to connect with other people who are like, yeah, I'm willing to carry this too, and I am carrying it. It's great to connect. So so if people would like to come and hang out with us, potentially they could bring a partner, they could bring a friend, but if they don't have folks in their world like that, then they definitely should be coming to hang out with us at Ritual and Practice for the Urban Homestead. We're jokingly calling it Apocalypse Camp. Haha, we get the joke. And it's happening in September on Cortez Island at Hollyhock. And if you want to find out more, you can go to hollyhock.ca, or you can go to my website, carmenspagnola.com, CarmenSpagnola.com. NOLA. Oh, you're signaling. What's one other thing you want to say?
NOLA.com. Is
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
There was a couple more things I wanted to say about Greer, actually, if I can.
Okay, let's think about how to.
Let's just keep going.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. There was something about his collapse that punctuated the stair-step collapse down.
Catabolic collapse.
The catabolic collapse, which is such an evocative metaphor because metabolism is eating food and catabolism is eating yourself.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like this is the cannibalism of our society. It's our society cannibalizing itself. So
Yeah, see, Mona's like,
Quite
oh,
a-
that sounds terrible.
yeah, so quite a metaphor. But the long descent, again, it sounds kind of smooth, maybe not such a big deal. But he also does speak a lot about how collapse is unevenly distributed. So what our culture right now very effectively does is distributes collapse into poor communities, communities of color, other countries. So our culture is very strongly distributing collapse elsewhere as hard as we can. Not into the white middle class neighborhoods. So I just want to be real clear about that it may look smooth here and it's not totally smooth elsewhere. It's actively bad elsewhere.
Absolutely. And there was an article that floated around, something around, climate change isn't really going to hit home as a concept until a whole bunch of white people die.
Yeah.
And then I read the article and I was like, when are they going to keep hammering on about how many white people are going to have to die? It was actually a very gentle article, I thought. That's like whiteness really is a motherfucker, and it's definitely not going to go gently into some kind of equally distributed collapse. That's definitely not the case. Collapse is happening right now, very acutely.
This is what collapse looks like. Yeah. And then the last thing I want to say it's almost kind of a counterpoint to that is he has this beautiful description, again, a thing I found so powerful that maybe it was on his blog and not in a book, but he talks about how the collapse of the Roman Empire took, say, 400 years or 300 years. And so the life of the average Roman citizen, like there would have been several generations of people that lived and died through that period. So through the life of the average Roman citizen in the middle of collapse of the Roman Empire would have seemed kind of day to day not very different at all. Like you get up in the morning, you look in the mirror, it's still the same you, and my metaphor for it is it's like going gray, that my beard is my beard color, my beard is my beard color, my beard is my beard color. Holy crap, I'm gray, and suddenly it's like there's this kind of shocking notice that's like this little stair-step collapse of my aging.
Of looking at the picture from 3 years ago and you're like, what?
Yeah, but for most of the time, for the next 300 years, it's going to be just kind of slowly going gray with these periodic, sharp, sudden, horrible things happening that then we'll probably kind of figure out how to manage for another generation or two of kind of mellow collapse before another real big stair step hits us.
Yeah, and I think that's why his response, like when I said, how do you find joy or whatever, he was like, he basically was like, I laugh at the world, and it was like, oh right, because you've been thinking about this for a long time. And so there's a deep and profound acceptance that means there's enough spaciousness to like joke about it, right? It's apocalypse camp. That's what we're doing.
And it's interesting, I'm sure this is something we will talk about a lot at Apocalypse Camp, that there is kind of there's the abstract thought of human civilization, which I'm not really that concerned about.
Yeah, I have no somatic discharge when you talk about that,
Yeah, but the real human pain, the palpable pains of each step of collapse is the part that hurts me as I forecast.
Well, and it's so pervasive and atmospheric, right? Like we were talking about this the other night, that it just sort of feels like the screws are tightening everywhere. And so people are antsy at work. There's more conflict over, there's more quote unquote divisive conversations, where there's more racial friction in our social discourse, or we a statue came down in our city, and like you and I have been fighting racists on the internet for so long, and writing all these things. It's like, it's just, between the economic precarity, real estate, housing insecurity, tent cities, places, governments, buffoons in government, all this stuff. It's like everywhere you look, there's just a slight tightening of the screw, and everybody's feeling just a little more pressure, a little more reactive, a little more antsy, a little more anxious, more for no reason, can't put a finger on it. And it's funny because I said to some friends the other night, I was like, it's just kind of more collapsy. And I just had this like blank faces. Nobody kind of got it, but I know that if I was in a different room with a few other people, they'd be like, this is what JMG is writing about. It's like, it's showing up in all these places. So if collapsy resonates with you as a descriptor of the sort of increasing stress of the world, you should probably come to Apocalypse Camp with us so we can, hang out late night by the bonfire and look out at the ocean. Or, you know what? They have an ocean view hot tub that is solar powered. We might as well let fucking conscious capitalism sing us a lullaby as we look at the stars. So come hang out with us. And,
stars will be there long after we're gone.
Yeah, might as well enjoy them while we're here.
Yeah. That's all I had to say. Thank you, my love. Would
That's
you like
all you
to?
had to say about that?
Would you like to give the website again?
There was like a sort of like pensive pause, and you seemed settled, and I was like, and let's wind this show up. So sorry I cut you off. Hope you'll come and join us at Apocalypse Camp. You know where to find all the information. Until next time, take care.